In 2020, the United States government created $4.5 trillion. Not earned, not borrowed from another country, created from nothing. And for about 18 months, almost nothing happened. No hyperinflation, no currency collapse. The dollar didn't turn into confetti. People were buying groceries, paying rent, ordering things online, and the price of a carton of eggs was still around $2. If you'd read any economics textbook written before 1980, you would have been absolutely certain civilization was ending. It wasn't. But here's what's uncomfortable. The textbooks weren't entirely wrong. The inflation did come. It just took longer than anyone expected, hit harder than most admitted, and left by the time most people understood what had actually happened. So the question isn't whether printing money causes inflation. It does. The question is, why does the system absorb the shock first, and what happens when it runs out of room? Let's start with what people think happens when money gets printed. The cartoon version goes like this. Government prints money, money floods into the economy, too many dollars chasing too few goods, prices go up. Simple, logical, clean. And in certain situations, in certain countries, at certain points in history, that's almost exactly what happens. Weimar Germany, 1923. Zimbabwe, 2008. Venezuela, 2016. The money printer runs, and within months, sometimes weeks, people are carrying cash in wheelbarrows just to buy bread. So why didn't that happen in America in 2020? Because the United States in 2020 was not Weimar Germany, and the mechanism by which money enters an economy is far stranger and far more fragile than most people realize. Here's the part they don't explain in the news. When the Federal Reserve creates money, it doesn't just airdrop cash from helicopters onto Main Street. What it actually does is buy assets, mostly government bonds, from banks. It credits the bank's accounts at the Fed with newly created reserves. Digital entries. Numbers on a screen. Those reserves sit at the Fed. They don't automatically flow into the economy. They can't buy your groceries. They can't bid up the price of lumber or gasoline. For that money to cause inflation, banks have to lend it out. Businesses have to borrow it. People have to spend it. The velocity of that money, how fast it moves through the system, has to actually be high. In 2020, velocity collapsed. People were scared. Businesses were shut. Nobody was taking out loans to expand a restaurant that couldn't legally seat customers. Banks were sitting on mountains of reserves and not lending aggressively because the risk environment was insane. The money existed on paper. In the real world, it was frozen. Think of it like water behind a dam. The reservoir fills up, but as long as the dam holds, the valley stays dry. Now, the government also did something different in 2020. Alongside the Fed's actions, Congress sent direct checks to households. Hundreds of billions in fiscal stimulus. That money was different. That money went straight to people. And here's where it gets interesting. At first, people saved it. The personal savings rate in America spiked to nearly 34% in April 2020, the highest ever recorded. People were uncertain. They held the cash. They paid down credit cards. They waited. Then the lockdowns ended. The vaccines came. The world opened back up. And suddenly, everyone wanted to spend at the same time. Decades of supply chain optimization, built for predictability, not for a synchronized global demand surge, could not keep up. Shipping containers were stranded. Semiconductor factories couldn't scale fast enough. Used car lots ran empty because new cars couldn't be built without chips. The dam broke, and the water that had been building for 18 months hit all at once. By mid-2022, U.S. inflation was running at 9.1%, the highest in 40 years. So here's the uncomfortable math. The money didn't cause instant inflation, but it didn't disappear either. It sat in the system, waiting. And when conditions changed, when supply constraints met pent-up demand and years of ultra-low interest rates, the delayed reaction arrived, and it arrived with compounded force. This is the part that central bankers genuinely struggle to model. The lag, the non-linearity, The fact that an economy can absorb enormous monetary expansion for an extended period and then reprice dramatically in a compressed window. The Fed, for most of 2021, called it transitory, temporary, a blip. They were wrong. Not because the theory was wrong, but because the timing was wrong, because the dam held longer than expected, and they started adding more water before the first surge had cleared. Now, zoom out for a second. This isn't just a 2020 story. Japan has been running massive monetary expansion since the early 1990s. Debt to GDP north of 250%. Interest rates near zero for 3 decades. And for most of that time, they've actually been fighting deflation, not inflation. How is that possible? Because Japan's population is aging and shrinking. Demand is structurally weak. The money created doesn't circulate aggressively. It doesn't have anywhere urgent to go. The dam holds not because the system is healthy, but because the downstream valley is already flooded with a different problem. The mechanism is the same. The context is everything. This means 2 countries can print the same amount of money and get completely opposite results, not because the economics are different, but because the demographics, the psychology, the velocity, and the existing debt load create entirely different environments for that money to land in. Which brings us to the thing nobody wants to say out loud. We are now in a world where major governments have demonstrated multiple times that they can create enormous quantities of money without triggering immediate collapse. And that demonstration has consequences. Because every time the system absorbs a shock without obvious penalty, the political temptation to use that tool again gets stronger. The tolerance for larger numbers grows, the threshold for emergency quietly expands. The risk isn't that one round of money printing destroys a currency. The risk is the accumulation, the slow erosion of confidence, the day when the market decides the dam isn't as strong as it looks and reprices everything simultaneously. It's happened before, not always with a dramatic collapse. Sometimes it's just a long, grinding decade where your savings buy progressively less, your wages don't quite keep up, and nobody can quite explain why everything feels more expensive and more precarious than it used to. So where does that leave us? The textbooks weren't wrong. Printing money does cause inflation. It just doesn't always cause it immediately. It causes it when the conditions are right. When velocity picks up. When supply can't respond. When confidence starts to waver. When the accumulated weight of all that deferred consequence finally finds a moment of weakness. The economy, it turns out, is less like a machine and more like a pressurized system. You can keep adding pressure for a surprisingly long time. The engineers will tell you it's under control. And they might even be right. Until they're not. The question worth sitting with is this. If the consequence is real, but the delay is variable, and if the people making the decisions benefit from the delay more than they suffer from the consequence, what exactly is the incentive to stop?